Hey folks, welcome to another Triple T Thursday. For those just joining us, that's tools, tips, and talk, where we'll discuss info for the knife maker. In today's episode, we're going to do our first real pattern in our Damascus pattern series. We're going to start with ladder pattern, or a variation on ladder pattern. We won't really talk about random pattern. I might mention it in passing in this episode. Let's talk about ladder pattern Damascus. That's really one of the first, what I consider the beginner patterns, because it really just involves stacking Damascus up, cutting some layers, cutting some grooves in it, and then repressing it. That raindrop pattern, which we're going to do next week, is very similar. You're just drilling holes instead of grinding or doing other things. So these are pretty basic. It's not like you have to tile or create a mosaic or anything like that. We'll get into those later.
First, we're going to light the forge. I've created a stack of 25 layers, 13 of 1084 and 12 of 15N20, and then welded up the corners. I've soaked the billet in some kerosene. That's going to burn off when it hits the forge and help with the forge weld. Let's get it in the forge to heat up as the forge heats up. Once the billet is up to a red temperature, we'll add some anhydrous borax. That'll prevent scale. And guys, don't buy the cheap stuff. Get this from a knife or blacksmith supply shop. We've got this billet up to forge welding temperature. We can tell by the borax smoking off it. We're going to do 3 heats with the large flat dies just to set the weld. After every heat, particularly the ones where we're forge welding, I always scrape the billet with a wire brush to take all the scale off. I never thought about quantifying this, but I was talking to my friend Rick Hall, and he was saying to reduce the billet 30% to set the weld. It's important not to try to draw out the billet during this phase. You want to just set the weld. We have to make sure we have a contiguous block before we start drawing it out, or the layers will separate. Here I'm just showing one feature of my press where I can turn the dies 90 degrees. And this way you don't need to make a whole ton of different dies. Sometimes you'll get a little slant on your billet, and it's necessary to just kind of hit it on the corners just to put it back into square. That's what I'm doing here. And now that I know the forge weld is set, I can press it on the sides and not worry about it delaminating. So let's talk a bit about distortion. With ladder pattern, you want the layers to stay really flat. If I were to use drawing dies here, it would put little valleys and kind of more of a ripple in the lines, and we don't want that. That's why I'm using all flat dies to draw this out to keep those layers relatively straight and horizontal. We're going to be doing 2 restacks on this billet. So you'll notice I'm keeping the billet really square with really sharp corners. That will aid us when we do the restack later. I want this billet to have a really consistent thickness before the restack, so I moved to using kiss blocks. This is a 1/2 inch kiss block, so I know the billet will be a 1/2 inch all the way down after we're done. And you'll see a lot of repetition here. I'll press the flat side and then square up the edges. Press the flat side, square up the edges, and keep going until I get it to the thickness that I want. Remember, we started with 25 layers, so we want this long enough that we can cut it up into 4 to give us 100 layers for our first restack. You can see we're almost there. The kiss blocks are engaging, which means this billet is going to be a 1/2 inch thick. Now we're just going to take it to the long flat dies and get it nice and flat. This will help us reduce the grinding for the restack.
Here we are after the first forging session. I let it cool down in the forge, so it should be pretty annealed right now. Next thing, we're going to cut off the ends, cut it in half again, and we'll have 4 pieces. Then we're going to grind those and restack it.
Probably the most used saw in my whole shop is this horizontal bandsaw. This is one of those set it and forget it kind of saws because it shuts off by itself.
So I've cut this up into 4 equal pieces. Remember, it's important to get them in the same orientation as when you cut them. We need to get these sides all the same. So what you're going to do is kind of pull up 2 and accordion them together. What I like to do is paint the end. Now that I have them all aligned exactly how I want, I'm going to paint the end with layout fluid and I'm going to number them 1, 2, 3, 4. Because then I won't forget what orientation they go in, and then as I grind the sides, the numbers will not get ground off. It's important to maintain this so that the same size, the same flow of the pattern. I mean, right now we're working on flat layers, but just get in the habit of doing that when you restack.
It's always best to use an angle grinder to remove the scale before you take it to your expensive belts on the grinder.
So now that I've got the scale ground off, I'll come over here. I usually like to just put them up to the platen and do this back and forth just to flatten it out. You can do it this way, it just takes longer. Again, you just want these stacked together, make sure that you don't see any visible gaps.
These Broadbeck incinerator belts are my go-to. If you don't have any of these, go get them. Links down in the description.
Okay, I've got these stacked up, they're all cleaned, ready to weld. Some of you may be asking, why on earth would he grind the sides? That's because I'm going to be TIG welding them. So I'm going to TIG weld the sides and just fuse these so that I have a 0 oxygen environment. If you don't have a TIG, like probably most of you don't, no problem. Just MIG the sides, okay, and then either open weld it or MIG these and then grind it flat. Your choice. I have a TIG, so I'm going to TIG the sides and then I'll just MIG the ends. All right, let's do it.
Here we are back at forge welding. Now remember, I didn't use a lot of flux here because we welded all the seams, so it's not going to smoke as much as it did before. One thing I'm paying attention to here is that I need to do another restack, so I don't want to get it too wide. So here I'm narrowing the billet so that I get enough length to cut it into 4 again to get us to 400 layers. And now we put the kiss blocks in. We still want it to be a 1/2 inch. You'll notice it's just going to be a little narrower, but just about as long. I can see why this is the most popular part on Forged in Fire. There's something about forging steel in the press, it's just really satisfying. Here again, I'm squaring up the corners. It'll make it much easier to do the restack because we don't have rounded corners that we have to deal with. We're doing some final flattening and squaring up the billet. Then we restack it, get it back in the forge. This will get us to 400 layers and getting ready to put our pattern in it. Here again, we're setting our weld. You can start to see why quality Damascus takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money. So I want my final dimensions of the billet to be about 2 inches wide, about 3/16 thick, and as long as I have enough steel. So we want to keep that in mind. We will be doing another forge session after we put the pattern in just to do that final press. So we have to take that into account too. Here I'm going for about 3/8 thickness. That's the thickness I want before I put the pattern in. I'm using the rolling mill just to dial in that thickness and get it really nice and flat and uniform. After this final round on the rolling mill, we're ready to start putting in our pattern.
There's a couple ways you can actually put the ladder pattern into your billet. You can grind it in with, say, an angle grinder or whatever kind of grinder you want to use, and you're cutting grooves in it. So you're removing that material, and then when you press it, the bottom of that gully is going to get pushed up to the top, so you'll see all of those layers are now going to get exposed to the top. So you'll start to see these rings. So a couple different ways you can put the pattern in. I said you can cut the groove and then press it, and that will bring up the bottom. The second way is you can have special dies created for your press that will press in gullies. Okay, but remember, if you're pressing something in, you still have to remove, you always have to remove something in this pattern. Okay, so if you press in the gullies, that means you have to remove and grind off the high spots. The only reason I don't like doing that is you end up usually grinding more off. If you're just using an angle grinder and grinding grooves, there's less material you're grinding out of the grooves than pressing in those grooves than grinding out the flat spots. So just a thing, but sometimes for the larger companies, that's just easier in their process. So there's some different ways. Now, obviously, the next variation is how you're going to put those in. Are you going to just put straight lines down your billet and just make it look like an actual ladder because it's going to have rungs of ladder? You can put them on an angle like that. What we're going to do this time is we're going to create a variation of ladder pattern called like a diamond pattern. So I'm going to be cutting diamond, so angled one way, then angled the other way, and it'll create little diamonds. So I think that'll look pretty cool, especially with 400 layer Damascus. And I'll put some graphics in the corner here. The first one is from Vegas Forge. They do great Damascus, so if you're looking for some Damascus, check these guys out. So here's a great example of some ladder pattern from them. Also, Alabama Damascus, another great supplier. Here's a graphic from them of ladder pattern Damascus. So check them out. There'll be links down in the description if you want to buy Damascus from these folks. Okay, so here's our billet all done. You'll notice I got it right at about 3/8, almost exactly 3/8, and I used the rolling mill. I know most of you don't have a rolling mill, like I said. The reason I use the rolling mill is because I don't have 3/8 of an inch kiss blocks, so that's why I use the mill to get it even. The other reason I like to do 3/8 here, one of the other things about ladder Damascus is you need to be really close to your final thickness when you put your grooves in. If you put your grooves in too early, you're going to forge this out and you'll over forge it, meaning that it'll be really, really distorted, because if you start at like,
really thick, 3/4 of an inch thick or 1/2 an inch thick, you'll put your grooves in, and then you'll forge it so much that you'll stretch them out, and you won't get your ladder because they'll be like big ovals at that point. So the reason I use 3/8 is because we're going to go down about 1/8 of an inch on each side, okay, on each side, and then leave 1/8 in the center. So after we forge this down, we'll probably be at about 3/16. So the key also is to put your grooves, okay, stagger them. I know you guys can't really see this. I'll do it with a marker. We're going to put one groove here, okay? The other groove has got to be offset here. Okay, make sure you don't get the grooves completely opposite. And I like to have these pretty tight. So we're going to do something like that. But again, these are going to be on an angle, and on an angle this way. Okay, so I'm going to just draw these out, map them out with a ruler, and scribe some lines on these things so we know where we're grinding. Oh, and I didn't mention, I'm actually going to cut this billet in half. Half's going to be for the raindrop next week, and this half's going to be for the ladder. I almost forgot to do the ones on the other side. So you'll notice that they are opposite. This point is opposite this peak here. So we want to make sure that they are not on top of each other. Okay, let's go put our grooves in. So you'll notice I've got a pretty wide disc in here. This way I'll get I'll get rounded edges. You don't want to use a cutting disc for this.
It's easiest just to put a light channel in first, and you can go back and make these deeper later.
So there are all the grooves cut into it. Went pretty quickly. Took me, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour to do all those. So yeah, now we're going to get it in the forge, flatten those out, and then I'm going to use the rolling mill to just give this some length. I expect it'll probably be, about that long when I'm done. All right, let's get her in the forge.
Now it's just a matter of pressing this billet. I don't even need it up to forge welding temps or anything like that. We're just giving it a couple presses to remove those high spots and low spots.
So here's the billet after forging. It's just over 3/16 right now, and it'll be about 12 inches long, because this will be a little bit of weld we got to get rid of. So let's go grind the scale off it and take a look at the pattern. Okay, so here it is after the etch. You can definitely see those diamonds. And this has been ground only to about 320 on the surface grinder. So yeah, pretty happy with it. And it came out just a hair under 3/16, like 0.182 or something like that. So pretty good. And it's exactly 12 inches long and about 2 inches wide. All right, let's talk about some other possible patterns you can do with ladder. So some different patterns. Of course, you can do the basic ladder, which would look something like this, where you're just doing bars and put them at an angle, like I mentioned earlier. You can do some other creative things. Really, it's all about subtracting something from the billet and then reforming it. So you can do something like this, and actually put them down half of the billet. And this is what some people call wolf's tooth. I've heard it called shark tooth before. And then another variation is to actually put them on the other side as well. And you get this kind of zigzag pattern, which can look really cool. Also, what I've done before, and I actually made these dies, which is a chevron pattern. And these chevrons actually go this way because you put the billet in here, you press it, and you're pressing material into the grooves, which then you're going to grind off, and then you just pull your billet out and, you know, press it into those. So that gives you a chevron pattern going this way. Obviously you could do, with a different die, you could do chevrons going the other way, which is a little bit like this, but not quite as up and down as this one. The options are pretty endless. I've also seen people do drill a hole, you know, these would be a little wider, but drill holes here. So it's kind of a combination of a ladder and a raindrop. And we'll cover raindrop in next week, but that kind of thing. Anything that's subtractive to the billet, give it a whirl.
So hope you enjoyed today's deep dive video into the ladder Damascus pattern. If there's any questions that I missed, put them down in the comments. I did want to take this opportunity to let you guys know that these billets will be for sale. Yes, I will actually be selling the billets that I make here on the channel for this series. They will go up for sale to my Patreon members first. And if you're not a Patreon member, why not? There's a link down in the description. Go check it out. There's lots of great perks for Patreon members. Another thing I wanted to mention is I am now offering in-person classes for the more complex Damascus patterns like feather, mosaics, and the copper Damascus. So if you're interested in joining me in the shop for a weekend, go take a look on my website. I also want to thank Maritime Knife Supply as our sponsor for providing all the steel. So if you need steel or anything else, go check out Maritime Knife Supply. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next one.